Hi everyone, and welcome to today's grammar lesson on contractions in English using the verbs to be, to do, and to have. In our lesson on spoken greetings, we used contractions throughout. These included what's up, how's it going, what's the matter, and it's nice to meet you. Perhaps these felt quite natural to you, but if they didn't, don't worry, because this lesson will explain contractions in more detail. The noun contraction refers to the process of becoming smaller. A contraction in English grammar is a phrase becoming smaller. A contraction is formed by shortening and combining two words. Have you noticed any patterns with the contractions we've seen so far? Do they look similar? How so? In the contracted form, when we have pushed the two words together, an apostrophe replaces the missing letter or letters. For instance, in what is up, an apostrophe replaces the I. What's up? What is up? What's up? Some other phrases, along with their contracted forms, include how is it going? How's it going? And it is nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you. We use contractions because they're quicker to say. They also sound more natural in conversational English. However, they are best avoided in formal writing because they are considered more informal. Contractions are commonly formed using the auxiliary verbs to be, to do, and to have, and using modal verbs. For anyone who is unsure, an auxiliary verb is used alongside a main verb. For instance, in the statement "it is snowing," is functions as the auxiliary verb to show that the snowing, the main verb, is ongoing. During this lesson, we are going to focus on contractions formed using auxiliary verbs, and we will look at modal verbs during another lesson. This is because there is lots to learn and a bit too much for one lesson. There are both positive and negative contractions, so we will look at both. Let's start with contractions using the verb to be. Contractions can be formed when this verb is an auxiliary verb and when it is the main verb of the sentence. Let me give you a couple of examples. He is running to the beach. In this sentence, is functions as the auxiliary verb, and it can be contracted to read, he's running to the beach. He is really sad. In this sentence, is functions as the main verb, but can still be contracted to read, he's really sad. So again, contractions can be formed using the verb to be when it is both the auxiliary verb and when it is the main verb of the sentence. Let's start with the present tense of the verb to be. The positive contractions are as follows. I am, I'm. You are, you're. He is, he's. She is, she's. It is, it's. We are, we're. And they are, they're. We contract the subject pronoun and the verb. I am, I'm. In this case, the apostrophe replaces the A. To form negative contractions using the verb to be, we can do it two ways. The first way is to add the adverb not after the positive contraction. I am not, I'm not. You are not, you're not. He is not, he's not. She is not, she's not. It is not, it's not. We are not, we're not. And they are not, they're not. I'm not is the only way of writing a negative contraction for the first person singular with the verb to be. However, for the other subject pronouns, he, she, it, we, you, and they, there is an alternative way to form a negative contraction. This is done by contracting the verb and not, so pushing them together. He is not, he isn't. She is not, she isn't. It is not, it isn't. You are not, you aren't. We are not, we aren't. And they are not, they aren't. As you can see, in each case, the apostrophe replaces the O in not. It doesn't really matter whether you say he's not or he isn't. The only difference really is that he's not places more emphasis on the not. For instance, he's not coming, as opposed to he isn't coming. Let's move on now to contractions using the simple past tense of the verb to be, was or were. In this case, we don't have positive contractions. This is because, if we did, these contractions would look exactly like the simple present tense contractions. He's, you're, we're, they're. This would be really confusing because we wouldn't know which tense was being used. Therefore, we don't contract them. I was, you were, he, she, and it was, we were, and they were. However, we do have negative contractions when using the simple past tense of to be. As with the simple present tense, there are two ways of forming these contractions. This is either by adding not after the positive contraction or by merging the verb and not. I was not, I wasn't. You were not, you weren't. He, she, and it was not. He, she, and it wasn't. We were not, we weren't. They were not, they weren't. Again, there is not much difference between these, except for the fact that weren't and wasn't are quicker to say, and was not and were not place more emphasis on not. Contractions using the verb to have are formed in the same way, as you will see in a moment. However, unlike the verb to be, with the verb to have, contractions can only be formed when have functions as the auxiliary verb. In grammatically correct English, we don't tend to form contractions when have is the main verb of the sentence. Let me provide you with a couple of sentences to help make this rule a little clearer. I have never run for the bus before. In this sentence, have functions as the auxiliary verb. Therefore, it can be contracted to read, I've never run for the bus before. In this sentence, I have a sore arm. Have functions as the main verb of the sentence, so would not be contracted, as it would read, I've a sore arm. However, in colloquial English, some people do contract have when it is the main verb. For example, I've a poor appetite today, or I've a sore head. This is something to be aware of if you do hear it. This rule also applies when using the past tense. I had played the piano for him many times before. In this sentence, had functions as the auxiliary verb. What is the main verb? That's right, played. Therefore, because had is the auxiliary verb, it can be contracted to read, I'd played the piano for him many times before. In this sentence, I had a really difficult time at school. Had functions as the main verb, so it should not be contracted to read, I'd a really difficult time at school, because this does not make sense grammatically. So, to recap, with the verb to have, contractions can be formed when it functions as the auxiliary verb. Using the simple present tense of to have, the positive contractions are as follows. I have, I've, you have, you've, he, she, it has, he's, she's, it's, we have, we've, and they have, they've. You may have noticed that the contracted forms of the simple present tense third person singular with the verb to have, he has, she has, and it has, he's, she's, and its, look the same as the contracted forms of the simple present tense third person singular with the verb to be. He is, she is, it is, he's, she's, it's. So how do you work out which verb it is? Here is a useful tip. Often, if there is a past participle after the contraction, the verb is has. For example, he's driven and she's eaten in their full forms would be he has driven and she has eaten. In the simple past tense, the positive contractions are I had, I'd, you had, you'd, he, she, or it had, he'd, she'd, it'd, we had, we'd, and they had, they'd. To form the negative, unlike with the verb to be, we don't tend to put not after the positive contraction. For example, I'd not. Instead, we go straight to contracting the verb and not. In the present tense, I have not, I haven't, you have not, you haven't, he has not, he hasn't, she has not, she hasn't, it has not, it hasn't, we have not, we haven't, and they have not, they haven't. In the past tense, I had not, I hadn't, you had not, you hadn't, he had not, he hadn't, she had not, she hadn't. It had not. It hadn't. We had not. We hadn't. And they had not. They hadn't. Moving on now to the auxiliary verb to do. In the present tense, I do, you do, he, she and it does, we do and they do. And in the past tense, I did, you did, he, she and it did, we did and they did. There are no positive contractions because I do and I did do not contract. So we will move straight on to negative contractions. Because there are no positive contractions, we cannot simply add on not. So again, we contract the verb and not. In the present tense, I do not, I don't, you do not, you don't, he, she and it does not, he, she and it doesn't, we do not, we don't, and they do not, they don't. In the past tense, I did not, I didn't, you did not, you didn't, he, she and it did not, he, she and it didn't, we did not, we didn't, and they did not, they didn't. Well done, everyone. That was a lot of information to take in. Next week, we will look at contractions using modal verbs. In the meantime, if you have any video requests, please do comment them down below, and thank you so much for joining. Have a lovely weekend. Bye!